Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tampa Bay Association of Black Journalists Black Male Media Project. I'm Rod Carter, past president of the TBABJ and current Region 3 director for the National Association of Black Journalists. NABJ launched the Black Male Media Project in the summer of 2017, and the hope was to help change the narrative around African-American men and images of Black men that we see on TV. And to that end, they've held wonderful workshops and they've had great conversations. And we're going to continue that tradition today with this fantastic conversation. We've assembled a very diverse group of folks here, a group of men who are in the business, and I'm super excited. And I'm just getting everybody's names and bios up real quick. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, but I'm going to start down the line and begin with Kevin Lewis, who's a sports anchor with ABC Action News in Tampa. We also have Langston Taylor, who's with the Tampa Bay Times. Tony Sadiku, who is a meteorologist with Fox 13. And last but certainly not least, past president of TBABJ and media monitoring guru for NABJ and NPR representative Eric Deggans. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to back up a second and let Kevin just kind of give us a brief history of who you are, where you're from, and where you've worked.
My name is Kevin Lewis. Like you said, I'm a sports reporter anchor at ABC Action News in Tampa. I moved to Tampa right before the shutdown in February of 2020, so it was great timing on my part. I came here from Madison, Wisconsin, so a lot more snow there. I was there for 8 years. Before that, I was in Tucson, Arizona for almost 2. And then my first job in TV right out of college was in Columbia, Missouri, the town I grew up in, or went to high school. And then I went to Marquette University, undefeated in football since 1960. For my college, born originally in Champaign, Illinois, though. So if I post anything about being a Cubs fan, whatever, that's where that comes from. So that's my quick snapshot.
Langston Taylor, Tampa Bay Times. Tell us a little bit about your career.
Thanks. So I'm a data editor at the Tampa Bay Times. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C. Went to school at University of North Carolina, got that men's basketball championship my senior year. I did an internship at the Charlotte Observer in North Carolina, and then did an internship here at the Tampa Bay Times in 2016. And came back after I graduated in 2017, started as a general assignment reporter, and then shifted into doing data. And so I've been here since then.
Fantastic, Langston. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Tony Sadiku, meteorologist, Fox 13. Tell us a little bit about your career path.
Thanks so much, Rod. Like you said, Tony Sadiku here at Fox 13 in Tampa, meteorologist, weekend morning meteorologist, and a weekday reporter. Started here in November, so 6 or 7 months ago. Also in the pandemic, so also a whirlwind of getting adjusted to the area, but the area has been so welcoming, so super glad to be here. I did time it right though, in terms of, coming here right when the Bucks were succeeding and bandwagoning on and being a Bucks fan. So that was a lot of fun. Obviously, no one able to go to the games, but at least it was fun to be on that bandwagon. Also, the fact that we had also won Stanley Cup and, just a big sports town. Prior to that, I worked in Charlotte. So I came from Charlotte, North Carolina, a lot of dynamic weather there. So that was a lot of fun. Also worked in Fort Myers. That's where I got my career started at the Fox station there. University of Florida grad and Mississippi State.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Go Gators. Worked in Gainesville for a half a minute. Literally 10 months. Eric Deggans, last but not least, the man, the myth, the legend. How are you, my friend? Tell us a little bit about your career journey.
Man, I feel more like myth than anything. But so wow, I'm the old head. When did that happen? Like I've lived
right behind you, friend.
Yeah, I tell you, I lived in the Tampa Bay area since 1995 when I joined the Tampa Bay Times as its pop music critic. And worked there for 20 years, mostly as a TV and media critic, but I was on the editorial board too. Now I'm the TV critic for National Public Radio, and I was TBABJ president for about 8 years. And I remember when chapter meetings, we had like 4 people coming. I mean, it's just so great to see. We had no diversity in the TV space, or relatively little diversity in the TV space when I started here. So it's just so great to see so many talented young brothers working in local television. It's just really great to see that. I'm really gratified. It feels like some of the work that we did at TBABJ when Rod and I started out doing it is paid off.
That's where I kind of want to start, and I'm going to stick with you for a second, Eric. One of the things that excites me greatly is to see Kevin and to see Tony and to see Langston, because they're younger guys doing things in spaces that Tampa historically did not have folks doing it.
Meteorologists, sports reporters, man.
Right.
Wow. That's so awesome.
I can't tell you the last time. In fact, I'm not sure, Tony, you may be the first Black male meteorologist the market has seen that I have seen. I don't recall one in the past. We've had
I think so.
Before.
I think so.
But the fact that you are there is hugely. Eric, talk for a moment about the change we have seen over the last few years in terms of the landscape of Black males on TV.
It's, I mean, local television, of course, as Rod knows, has been challenged financially and has constricted somewhat. But one of the benefits of that, I think, is that they have been forced to consider, more diversity because it's just necessary in today's times. You can't field a TV lineup of anchors that were the way that we saw. We talk about the weekend ghetto, and I know that's still a problem sometimes with Black folks being relegated to the weekends, but I look at morning television now and I see Black anchors everywhere. And it just wasn't the case when I started in 1995. And in fact, one of my big stories that I did when I was at the Tampa Bay Times is that they were going to take Denise White, who was then one of the area's longest tenured Black anchors, and move her off the 5 p.m. broadcast. And I wrote a story, and the NAACP got involved, and they were almost protesting. They were going to do it on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, which was just insane. And we had to mobilize the community to get them to change what they were going to do. And now to see the level of diversity, it's really gratifying to see that the market has finally woken up to the idea that you really need to reflect the community on the air to get people to watch.
And I'm going to slide back down to Kevin. I want to talk to you specifically about sports. We see a lot of African Americans playing sports, maybe not as many covering sports. What has the challenge been like for you? Is there something that you have experienced that maybe your colleagues who don't look like you have not, that you want to point out to people that they may not realize?
I think I'm fortunate to have started in a time where I grew up seeing more Black and brown faces on TV. So I was kind of ready. I went in kind of open-minded, kind of naive, kind of unsure of what to expect. But I was fortunate, knock on wood, not to have had anything like systemic, that I felt like in terms of my job. Maybe the places I lived, I saw things in the community, but not in terms of covering sports itself. I think because, when I went in the locker room, there were a lot of Black athletes in there. There were coaches. There were things. I think maybe if I had started in the 80s, 70s, 80s, maybe even early 90s, there would have been more things maybe to my disadvantage. But in terms of, go ahead.
Let me ask you a question about that. So does that help, hinder, or neither? When you walk into a locker room and you see brown faces and they see a brown face coming back at them, does that help you in your coverage? And how do your non-Black colleagues view that?
I think it helps. I think in any situation, if I walked in and it were all white guys in there and I was the only brown or Black face, it would, I don't want to say naturally, but you kind of be like, whoa. Or if it was the other way around, I work with a lot of white people in the business. And I think it helps just because, like I said, I didn't grow up, in a situation where I was the only Black person in a locker room or reporting on something. So I hope I'm answering your question right.
The reason
it makes it, I felt comfortable again, only because I'm young enough to have been in a situation where, there were no separate locker rooms, or there were no, I was able to cover these things, and players, of all races, they were comfortable with me in there, I think, because, their situation, reporters come in the locker room. So I was comfortable, and it didn't make me any more or less comfortable to see, Black athletes there. I felt overall, I felt comfortable immediately, which I think helps. And I haven't, my white colleagues, I think, felt the same way, again, because we were all, I've worked in places where everyone's pretty much within 5 years of age of each other, and they've kind of had the same experience in the same way that I did, if that makes sense.
So,
Rod, if I could break in for
Go
just a second, I would say that my experience has been covering television on a national level, is that what we're seeing now is there's a level of Black excellence that's happening. And TV writers and executive producers, people like Ava DuVernay and Gloria Calderon-Kellett, who did One Day at a Time. These people are networking with each other and helping each other. And them knowing that I'm an advocate for diversity in media has sort of allowed me a little entree into that club. And so it's not every Black person that I meet in television, but there is like we all kind of know each other, right? Kenya Barris and Ava DuVernay and Larry Wilmore and people like that. We all kind of know each other because we've all been doing this for a while, and we can all kind of help each other and advocate for each other in different ways. And that is something that I feel is relatively new, and it's really interesting to see it.
And it's not just television, Langston. I mean, you deal with the same sorts of issues in newspaper. I guess my question too would be, when it comes to things in the community that you have to cover, do you feel like your colleagues look to you for specific information because you have pigmentation, or do you cover a wide variety of things? I've only been in Raleigh for about 3 or 4 months, and I think I've been asked specifically to help with one thing, and it had to do with a Black person. And I was like, okay, I don't really know her, but sure, I'll try it. And I did what any journalist will do. Google, found a phone number. Actually, I did use a connection, got the woman's phone number, called her and talked to her. They probably thought, see, they all know each other. I knew that, but I didn't. But do you find yourself being that person they go to? All right, so we have this story about the Black community.
Not usually. I would say there's been a couple cases where, and I didn't have a problem with this. I appreciated it. Some white colleagues were writing something, and it had to do with history of Black folks, and they just want another set of eyes to look over it. Mm-hmm. And that can help. It's a credit to any newsroom that brings in more Black people to just have those extra eyes. I would say that one thing we did, and I know lots of places have done things like this before, and TBABJ itself is a version of this, but we tried to formalize recently a small diversity committee within the newsroom, which makes answering those questions a little bit more formal and a little bit more directed. So if someone has a question about how they want to cover something, it's not like, hey, you're Black, maybe you can help me out, or hey, like this person in the newsroom is gay, maybe they can help me out. It's like, hey, this body exists to help answer these questions, help provide perspectives. I think that makes people more comfortable asking where they need it.
And I will say that the catch-22 is that I want them to ask, because I would much rather them ask me and get some perspective than to just throw something against the wall and see what happens. But then do you want to be pigeonholed and go, that's all they ask you? So I guess there is a catch-22. Tony, I want to talk to you because I'm fascinated. Weather is a very interesting thing that I know about zero. But what challenges do you face being an African-American male meteorologist? Do you face any specific things that people say to you, about you or around you that would impact how you do your job?
I think the one thing is just how shocked people are oftentimes to see a Black male meteorologist. Mm-hmm. I get that a lot from the community. At the time I was in Fort Myers, I was the first Black male meteorologist, and then they hired someone else, which was a Black chief, which was incredible. When I went to Charlotte, I was the first, I don't know if the first of the market, but I was the first at the time. There was no other Black meteorologist. And then they hired someone else at another station, which is great. And then here, we have Autumn, which is great, obviously holding down the fort at TSP. And so there's always that. And then in terms of challenge, there is something that was memorable, like in my first job, was how, like, I think a lot of stations struggle to you know, especially when they don't have a lot of Black on-air personnel, like they struggle to like identify their needs. And like for me, it was the lighting in the studio. It was not designed for
We're all nodding because we've all been there.
we've all been there. So
Right.
I mean, like, and like people would tell me this, like, lighting really doesn't look good, like, you know, for you. And like when I would try to bring this up, it just,
Yeah.
not prioritized. And anyways, so that was a struggle there.
That's interesting. Let me put a pin in that, because I will not put a pin in. I want to stay there for a second. All of you can answer this question. Are there times when you feel like you bring something to the table that is a concern for you as a Black male, that the response is just what Tony said, like, you know, not really jumping on that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it happens all the time. It's hard for me sometimes to separate when they're ignoring me because I feel like they're not understanding what a Black person needs, and when they're ignoring me because they don't understand what I need. But I've always been somebody who just makes a way. So if they don't go along with what I need, then I find a way to make it happen. And then when it works out, everybody gets to pat themselves on the back and say, "Oh, what a great idea that was." And I'm the one sitting here knowing, yeah, what was my idea? But yeah.
You know, it's interesting because one of the situation that we had here, we had a Black male reporter pitched a story, and I know this is, you're all going to go, yeah, because this has been a big deal, about hair. And there was a young lady who was playing baseball or softball, and she had beads, and they told her she had to take the beads out. But in order to do that, she had to cut her braids. There was so much resistance from certain people in our newsroom about that story because they didn't get it. What they kept saying was, well, those are the rules. You can't have beads. Those are the rules. You can't have beads. And I said, and that's the problem. Who's making the rules? So he found himself on this meeting call, like almost, you know, like Leon Spinks on the ropes, trying to like tell him why this is important, why this is important. How big of an issue is having people who have cultural context in newsrooms to provide that? We kind of touched on it a little bit with Langston, so I'll start with you about people being able to talk to you about certain things.
I mean, it's a huge deal, and you know, not just me. We've done a good job of, I think, trying to hire some more Black and brown folks. You know, I would say for me, there are things that, like just dealing with data, even things that I think I've noticed that other people wouldn't notice. One, like sometimes data will be formatted in a way where if there's an apostrophe, it'll mess it up. And you start going through names and which names have apostrophes in them, you start recognizing, okay, we're gonna undercount some Black folks here. So I think that, you know, those are the kind of things that you just have to keep an eye out for. And you might not, you know, always know that you need to communicate that to folks, but, you know, can't hurt. So, I mean, certainly the more people we can get in there, the more support you have for pitching stories like you just mentioned. So you're not the only one saying that. And then I think we all sort of recognize the value there.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I kind of think there's always the, and there was a story like you're talking about a couple of years ago. I think it was a high school wrestler who had, I don't know if it was dreads or something, and a referee made him cut, you know, the hair. And I remember that coming up, that was at my last station. And and a couple other times where it's, you know, something happened to a Black. So, and then it's kind of, it was an all white newsroom at the time. And I think everyone kind of gets the like,
yeah, they do that
during the meeting, like, and I don't think, and I've said to people before, like, hey, if you have like, don't be afraid to ask me something, you know, about my experience. Like, hey, as long as you phrase the question correctly, I think it's, you know, not, hey, you're Black, you know what I mean? Like, hey, you know, and if you come at me or anyone else with like, hey, I'm not, you know, I'm asking because I really want to know if you, like you asked, in your experience, has this ever happened? Like, I think there's a way to approach it if you're not Black or brown that doesn't make you, you know, doesn't make it the, you know, kind of the darting, like, oh, well, you're a person of color, you should know, you know, this. So, I mean, I just, that experience, you know, I think that's something that's been evolving. And I think it's gotten, you know, I don't want to say it's gotten better for everybody because I don't know everybody's experience, but I think, you know, in where we are now, I think people are getting better, and you know, the road goes both ways too. You know, with white people, Asian, Hispanic, whatever you are, of, hey, like, I have a question about your experience, you know, because sometimes when you say, oh, I don't want to offend you, but, and then of course, you know,
Yeah.
They say something
going to. So yeah,
it almost guarantees something offensive is coming next.
I don't want to sound like a jerk here, but yeah. So
that's usually what follows an insult. I hope this isn't insulting. Don't say it.
You know what's interesting to me is like when I was I mean what's good about this current media climate is that it's kind of accepted. I think it's out there in the journalism mainstream that that there are cultural things that disadvantage Black people sometimes when it comes to us getting coverage. And there's a lot of talk about, you know, how do we cover hair and how do we cover this and how do we cover that? When I was in the newsroom of the Tampa Bay Times and trying to advocate for these things, you know, there was an arrogance. There was a sense that, you know, well, of course we're not bigots, so we can't possibly be doing this wrong. And we had a staff meeting of editors where I gave a diversity presentation where I had to roll out, you know, 3 or 4 examples where our coverage, where we had made mistakes that they don't make anymore. Like we had done a photo shoot about Halloween costumes, and we had featured, I don't know, 7 or 8 people, and all of them were white, none of them were non-white. And I just sort of said, what are you telling your audience about who you expect to be reading this? You know, and another thing was that we'd taken we've done a whole photo essay on Gasparilla once. And the only photo that featured a non-white person was a little Black kid who was holding on to one of those grates that they put to control the crowd. He was holding on to that fencing, and they had cropped the photo so it looked like he was in jail. And I was just like, again, like, what sort of message are you sending about who you expect to be reading your paper and how you're representing them? And you know, people, some of the editors I could tell got offended. And I'm just like, you know, this is not about your feelings. This is about reflexive decisions that you're making about coverage where you're not thinking about the entire community. You're just thinking about people who look like you. And I feel like the industry's made a lot of progress in that area. And I feel like the Times has made a lot of progress, but it was really hard in those days where there wasn't already this accepted conversation happening out in society about how those decisions get made.
To that end, I want each of you to kind of just go and give me your synopsis over the last year. I think, you know, we had this conversation last year, mid-pandemic, shortly after George Floyd, sort of almost in the midst of all of these protests that are happening. Well, the protests for the most part have died down. It's been a year and a couple of weeks since George Floyd. And I will tell you that company I worked for had a diversity and you know, inclusion and equity committee. And that was the first time I'd ever even heard them say the word diversity. I say that in jest, but I mean, a lot of companies started doing this.
Right.
And just what you were talking about, Eric, bringing these things to the table. And then, you know, I talked more about diversity with non-brown people last year. And I was like, what is going on? How has your individual career changed, or what have you seen and in the last year? Any stories that stick out to you? And I'll start with Tony and get your thoughts on that.
It's been interesting to see. There was a diversity and inclusion group at SOC where I was at the time prior to George Floyd, which is good. But I think that station in particular has a Black GM, like they prioritize certain things, which you don't see everywhere. But for me, like, and I think for a lot of people, having to stomach what was going on as a Black person, and then as a Black journalist having to, you know, I don't know, there was a level of almost censorship that I felt like, you know, you can't say exactly how you feel at times, which, you know, I think for me personally at the time, it felt like heavy, right? So I had to lean on other Black folks. And then there was something that happened that really like had me boiling in essence. Almost right after George Floyd, literally a week later, I was reporting in a neighborhood just outside of Charlotte, actually. and I was doing a story about like flooding, and I was knocking on doors. Someone had actually invited us to their home. They weren't home at the time, so they told us to, hey, go knock on my neighbor's door, and they'll talk to you about this flooding issue that we're having in our neighborhood. So I go knock on their door. They're like, okay, it's a problem, but I don't really feel like talking. You guys know how it goes. Go knock on the next neighbor's door. So I go knock on their door, and this person's welcoming me. He takes me to the backyard. He shows me the issue and all this stuff. And by the time we're coming back to the front yard, there was 2 cop cars in the neighborhood, and they were looking for. I was with a Black photographer. They were looking for suspicious people in the neighborhood. Someone had called the cops, and that was just an off-striking moment because, like here we are, with everything going on. Obviously, it wasn't George Floyd; it was Ahmaud Arbery. It was everything else at the time, and the moment literally brought my partner to tears because he said, in quotes, "This is how we die." Like, this is, obviously they weren't threatening to us because they approached us. They saw, we were in an unmarked news van, they're like, "Oh, you guys are with the news. It's no problem." But, you think about the number of ways that could have gone.
It could have turned easily. And I think every single one of us has been through that before. Sadly. Langston?
Yeah, well, and I also want to jump in on something Eric said, which was that, in the year before everything popped off, I would say like we had done like another like internal audit of like, every name in the paper, every face in the paper, and and they still skew white. And I think even staff that thought they were doing a good job were like, oh, okay, well, just count and helped it. I do like to think of last summer as sort of the time when a lot of people decided racism was bad. So I appreciated that.
Wasn't it? It was like, whoa, where have you guys been?
And so I think that, not just in media, but in a lot of part of the world, it was like, okay, well, how can we change something else that we recognize as racist? So like in our paper, like we had been automatically just publishing, mugshots, constantly, like automatically as a feed. They decided, we're not going to do that anymore. It's not really helpful, and we think it overemphasizes, Black faces as criminals and underestimates white faces. And that was a response to things that popped off last summer. It didn't have anything to do with the police shooting. It was just racism is bad. Personally, I remember in Charlotte covering a police shooting trial and being in the courtroom and covering the video in depth and hearing the shots again and again. So I'm at a point where I didn't really feel the need to delve into something like that again. They all kind of feel the same to me in a macro sense. So I think that, I was interested to see those sort of, other ways that newsrooms dealt with racism. You saw newsrooms, having conversations about, do you capitalize the B in Black? These sort of tangential conversations where, all right, we know racism is bad, but now we really know racism is bad. So let's try to do something. And I don't know, it was an interesting thing to see, I would say.
Kevin, it's really interesting to me how I felt like Kaepernick was sort of John the Baptist screaming in the wilderness by himself for a long time, saying exactly what everybody then saw last year. The intersection of sports and race last year was fascinating to me, to see all of the things that the NFL started doing in terms of Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing. What has your experience been the last year?
It was weird because I moved here at a very strange time, and when everything kind of shut down, I mean, I've been inside our station twice since March of 2020. So I thought, I kind of thought about like, man, what if there had been like a newsroom and we had all been in the morning meeting, like talking about these things in person instead of, over Zoom, which is fine. But like, I think you kind of miss the interaction. It was strange because I wanted to see kind of the fall. I was, George Floyd happened, and then a friend of a friend, Wesley Matthews, who plays for the Lakers now, played for the Bucks when they were playing in the bubble in the NBA, and they were the first team. I remember I came home from the store, I think, and I was like, oh, the Bucks are playing, and watch the game. And they said, the Bucks have refused to play. They're not going to play today in protest. They want these conversations to start. And I was like, wow, and we were that week, we'd set up Zoom calls, the weekly news conference with the Rays and the Buccaneers and the Lightning. And I remember once with the Rays, Tyler Glasnow, their ace pitcher, white guy, he started because I think it was a Friday when Major League Baseball games paused, and the Milwaukee Brewers were one of them. And Glasnow opened up the press conference and he's like, I don't know what it's like to be black. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I've never spoken to any of my black or brown teammates before about that. So he's like, that's, he's like, not that I didn't want to, but now, I am, because I just never thought about it. And I was like, wow, I've never heard an athlete, a white guy, just be like, I don't know what it's like. He's like, I just want to say that because I don't. And he's like, I don't know what my teammates' experiences is watching a guy get choked to death by a police officer. So let's, have some conversations and see whatever. I'm like, wow, okay, that's, and then Bruce Arians, when the Buccaneers had their first, he grew up, he said, I saw the National Guard going down streets in tanks when I was growing up. And he's like, and he has stories for days. He just says, diversity, you learn by being different. He's like, you got to listen to everybody. And I was really, I was just kind of like, wow, like all, these white figures in a market that I cover that have a voice were like, all right, let's talk about these things. And I just thought that was really important, just to have, not, we'll have an internal conversation with the team. Like, it's important to have these conversations by yourself, like the canned answer. And it's kind of an aside, one of my really good friends works at K-A-R-E in Minneapolis. And he texted me, he was on the rotation of reporters that got to go into the courtroom for the Chauvin trial. And he texted me once just randomly at night after he got done with his live show. He's like, is anything going to change? ? And he's white. And I was like, wow, I'm like, stay safe up there, whatever happens. And he just was like, I've never felt so helpless before, because he's like, I'm watching a white guy kill a black person. Like, cause they showed the whole 9 minutes and 29 seconds in the courtroom. And he's like, and he's opened up to me a little bit before about these things, but I was like, wow, I've never had somebody come to me with that. And he just said, I saw a guy get killed for 9 minutes, and like, I couldn't do anything. And he's like, what if I was one with a cell phone? So I've had, sorry for rambling, but I've just had some different, conversations. Just, I enjoy, I think the good part about my job is that, Bruce Arians is almost 70 years old, and Tyler Glasnow is in his early 20s. And I know somebody, who plays in the NBA kind of. So I look back once and I was like, wow, I just thought it was refreshing to hear from all corners, like Langston was saying, wow. So there's some people who, think, oh, racism is bad. Oh, it's really bad now. But, some people who are like, all right, let's talk about, let's advance. Let's move forward a little bit.
I wrote this book back in 2012 talking about race in media. And so I've spoken out a lot, given a lot of presentations on race and diversity in media. So when George Floyd died, I got calls from businesses asking me to come in and talk. And the thing that I noticed is that they wanted me to come in and give a presentation, and they could go, okay, we talked about racism.
Check the box.
And I kept challenging them to do more and to think about it differently. Mm-hmm. And so I think there were some companies that just had this knee-jerk reaction where they wanted somebody to come in and give a seminar and then move on. And that troubled me. But I don't want to lose sight of how important a revelation George Floyd's killing was, because it convinced a lot of white people that systemic racism exists and that it is killing Black people. And that was the big issue I felt that we kept hammering at when we kept talking about all these different problems with racial oppression of Black people in media and in society. There were white people who would not accept that it was part of a system. And now we finally have more white people accepting that systemic racism is not only a problem, but that it's deadly to people of color. And we shouldn't shrug that off and say, oh, now people care about racism. That's a big deal. And that helps all of these discussions about racism in newsrooms, because they suddenly understand it's part of a system. And once you get them over that hump, then it's easy to show, well, there's health disparities. More Black people are dying from COVID. There's financial disparities. Our family wealth is a fraction of white people's. There's education disparities. There's law enforcement disparities. We are disproportionately jailed for drug crimes, and we're disproportionately killed on death row. So once you get over that systemic racism issue, you can have a lot of conversation.
You think the shrugging it off comes from the fact that so many years people of color have been saying these things, and it's like this one horrific incident opened everybody's eyes? I mean, it was horrible, but I think maybe that's where it comes from, because you feel like you've said it so many times. It's like, oh, now you hear me.
Well, it's not even that. It's like we have a pattern in America of progress and backlash, progress and backlash. We elect Barack Obama, and then we get Donald Trump. We have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We have the Voting Rights Act of 1964, and then we get Nixon elected president. There's progress and there's backlash. And so as Black people, we have a defense mechanism where we see progress and we're like, oh shit, because you know what's coming, right? And I could feel it by the end of the summer. I could feel it by the end of the summer, you know, that backlash was already building. And some white people were trying to figure out how to explain away George Floyd's death without acknowledging systemic racism. And by January, we saw Tucker Carlson talking about how, oh, he overdosed on drugs, or oh, he had a heart problem. And all of a sudden, that was a talking point on Fox News. Yeah. So we know the backlash is coming. And I think that's part of why we're like, oh yeah, now they care about racism. Wait 6 months, right, and we'll see if they still care about racism.
So the last question for each of you, and then we'll go to some questions from some young men with a mentoring program that is called Gentleman's Quest in Tampa. And I'll admit that this is kind of an emotional question, because this happened to me. There were a couple of times where I had to like check my emotions. It didn't really work because I'm really emotional. But the day the verdict came in, just before our newscast, I had to like get all of this together because I was like really emotional about the outcome. And the day that the riots happened in Tampa were the days that just really affected me. Emotionally, how have you guys been able to deal with everything that you see? You know, I think Tony nailed it perfectly when he said, you're out there just doing your job and someone calls the cops because they think you're suspicious based on absolutely nothing but how you look. How do you guys deal emotionally with everything that's been going on over the past year and a half? Nobody jump in quickly. I'll call a name.
I just didn't want to dominate the conversation.
One of the things that I know people think is that African-American men, that we don't have emotions. We don't get emotional about things, and we're just like stoic all the time. And that's just not true. I know that's not true.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was more recognizing, like, this is going to sound like a weird analogy, but, I covered media at the Tampa Bay Times when there was a lot of downsizing going on in the local media industry. And I was constantly having to call people who had been laid off from their jobs and talk to them about what had happened to them, including people that I had worked with at the Tampa Bay Times for years. And it wasn't until I'd been through that and had some distance on it that I realized that I got a little bit of survivor's guilt and PTSD from that. And I was depressed and really kind of went through a lot of stuff emotionally, and I didn't understand why it was happening, and so now in this moment, I can see it and I can say, okay, the reason why I'm depressed is because I had to watch not only the George Floyd video for 9 minutes during the trial, but I had to also watch the animation recreating it. And I had to also, watch 4 or 5 people talk about it, and then I had to watch a expert on pulmonology, him talk about it. I realized, okay, this stuff is traumatizing me. And I think the awareness that trauma has an effect, and that you can be doing your job, you can even be doing a story on something totally different, and it can come over you and affect your emotions. That was an important realization for me, and it helped me get control of it. Yeah. But yeah, and in fact, when the video first hit the news, when George Floyd was first killed, I didn't watch it at first. I remember turning on CBS This Morning and them saying that they had this video, and I was like, I can't do it, and I had to wait. And I thought if it becomes a big media thing, then I'll force myself to watch it, which I finally did. But when it first broke, I wouldn't even watch it.
Yeah, it was tough. Tony, how have you dealt with this emotionally over the past year?
It's not easy. I'll admit, I mean, like, especially right after, I just try to look away, but yet I could feel the tension. Like everyone I talk to, everyone's talking about it. Like part of me is glad that people are talking about it, but at the same time, it's like this is just part of, like, I mean, I feel like I almost want to forget that there's this reality of being Black, and you just remember all over again. Oh, I do need to be careful when I'm walking in my neighborhood. I do need to be careful when cops pull me over, and like, all these things. But I will say, like, when the verdict came in, like, I was shocked. Like, even knowing to the scale that it was, I mean, I just feel like we've seen it time and time again where justice just isn't served, and that was emotional to actually see that happen.
Yes, in our newsroom, we were talking about that, and people were like, I mean, they had to find him guilty. I'm like, Rodney King, hello. And they're like, oh, yeah. Langston, emotionally, how's it been for you?
Not great. And I would say that, I have appreciated how both, just in personal life and in the media overall, how people have been more cognizant of and supportive of mental health, and being like, check out if you need to, here's some resources if you need to. A lot of jobs, our job will provide, a few free therapy sessions to anybody. I think that what I noticed was the connective thread where we had a non-Black but brown reporter get handcuffed during one of the first days of the protest, and that, like, anger, is not an isolated feeling. You recognize how it connects to everything else. Not in work, but like, I got handcuffed by police in my house a few months ago, and like, it just brings it back to each previous thing. I would say that, and then further, beyond the protests, seeing and I want to sort of clarify, not really shrugging it off, but noticing that a lot of the response was, well, let's address something else about racism. Let's talk about voting rights. That was sort of a sports league approved response to a lot of this at one point in the summer. Feeling the helplessness or anger, seeing that connected is really hard, and it accumulates. So no, not great, but you rely on your support system, you rely on other Black folks. Like, I've been lucky, and I would say that people should always ask for help when they need it. I've to I think what Tony also said, like, not having to, like, look at the video right away, knowing what it is, knowing how you're gonna react, take care of yourself for sure.
And Kevin?
Yeah, it's been a different year, I think, for everybody. And, you see a guy get killed on TV, I mean, like, the thing is, what if there were no phones? Like, what if, it was 20 years ago, no one had a cell phone? It could have just been a cop's word against somebody. And I think my brain goes to kind of okay, what tangentially is going to come out now? Like, oh, he had a heart problem, or, oh, he was on drugs. Like, there's always going to be a voice from another side, like either trivializing or something, like, it's not that big a deal. Like, oh, it's just because it was on TV. Oh, cops kill white people too. Like, the whole, like, it churns in my brain. And yeah, and I'm just like, oh, and when the insurrection video, I forgot what show on, and it was CNN, they were like, disturbing videos coming up, but they're like, no, we showed George Floyd getting killed on TV, like guys climbing a wall. You know what I mean? It's just everything. It's stuck having, like, to always compare something to something else, like the voting rights issues now. Like, oh, well, Colorado does it this way. Like, it's not really, Georgia. Well, we're opening, and it's just like, it just can never be enough for something, it just can't be like, God, this is a problem, or, oh, this isn't, it's just whatever. You want to get clicks, you want to get, mentions. I think in sports, it's been healthy for me, like mental health wise, just because it's been refreshing to see leagues, the All-Star game in baseball is moving out of Georgia. Like, I think the response there, because, like it or not, in the locker room, there's black guys, there's white guys, there's brown, there's, if you're gonna, racist your way out if you exclude people based on color in any sport. When the Lightning played the Panthers and it was the Walcott, Smith, and Matthew line, the first all-black line in NHL history, starting and forward, and then Anthony Duclair for the Panthers. My friend was covering the game in Miami, and he was like, "Wow!" He's like, "There are 4 black guys on the ice, like in a hockey game." I talked to Matthew Joseph one-on-one, a Lightning player, and I said, when I was growing up, it was Grant Fuhr was like the only guy, and he was a goalie, so you never saw his face. And to see multiple, and the Lightning, it's just locally, but the hockey is for everybody. They're, the doors open. They have the best owner in sports. So I think just for me personally, sports have been a really great way to kind of, I'd rather watch that than, cable news yell about, they're all guilty. We're all guilty. Somebody's guilty at some point in any media of, either downplaying or, well, it's not this, it's this. So, for me, I think sports, open the door a little bit when I felt a little shut in watching, you go on the list, Taylor, Arbery, Floyd, and I didn't have Tony's experience, thank goodness, because I think, news being out in the field is different than, I'm spoiled. I get to go to the Bucks practice facility. That's where I don't have to, go into a community where, oh man, somebody could call the cops on me because I'm walking around with somebody else who's black. So, I like listening to every, because news, weather, and sports in online, print, radio, TV, whatever you work in is just completely different. And I just like, I like listening to everyone else. So this is pretty cool.
I just have a quick question for Tony. Tony, did you share that story that happened at SOC? Did you share that with your colleagues in the newsroom? And what was their reaction?
I didn't share it widely. And maybe it was a mistake. I was already like heated, and I didn't want a lot of people reacting or giving me any sort of, I just kind of
kept it under the radar.
Yeah. I didn't feel comfortable.
Well, I'll tell you,
I didn't think anything would happen,
Well, I'll tell you the reason why I asked. Probably nothing would have happened. There was a time back in, early 2000s, I was at Tampa at Channel 8. And I called this woman who'd had her husband killed. Her husband was killed in a robbery or something. And I called her, said, "Hey, we wanted to come talk to you about this." And she said, "Oh, that's fine." She gave me the address, hung up the phone. 30 seconds later, the phone rings back. And she said, "Is this Ron Carter?" Which made me laugh because I was like, "It's Rod, yes." And she said, "Hey, I just wanted to ask you a question. Are you Afro-American?" And I said, "I'm African-American, yes." And she said, "Oh, well, I just wanted to let you know, because my son's father was killed by an Afro-American, he's afraid of them now. So he may run and scream when he sees you." And I said, "Okay, well, there's 2 of us coming, so you may want to put him in a room." And she's like, "Okay." And I hung up the phone. And I told some of my non-Black colleagues, and one of them in particular sticks out. I won't say her name, but she was always very down for the cause and that sort of thing, and woke. And when I told her that story, she started laughing, and I just sat there, and she's like, "That is the funniest thing I've ever heard." And I said, "Well, I'm glad you think it's funny that my skin color is going to startle and scare a 3-year-old person." And then it hit her like, "Oh my God, it's not just funny, it's really sad." And I was like, so I say that to say, I told everybody in the newsroom that story because I wanted them to understand that I'm a journalist, but I'm a Black journalist. So sometimes when I go out, the responses are going to be completely different than when you go out. And I think it was an educational moment for her. Now, the funny part of the story is my photographer, who was Black and male, and his name was Rod, which was hilarious. We get in the van, we go over, get out, go in the house, and this 3-year-old boy runs over to me and jumps in my lap and starts having a conversation about his pet rabbit. And he's like, "Do you want to see my rabbit?" I'm like, "Sure." And he goes and gets a rabbit, and we sit there and talk about the rabbit. And then he runs off and plays. And his mother and grandmother are like, "Well, he's never done that before." And I'm thinking, because he's not the racist, but okay, let's just get this interview over with. So I tell people that story because I think people don't understand that as Black men and as journalists, we're already looked at a certain way. And then you add in male, we're looked at a certain way. And then you add in black male, we're looked at another way. So it's, it's hugely important. And I'm not berating you by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm glad you told that story, Tony, because I think it's important to tell. People don't realize what we face. I had a friend of mine who had a gun pulled on him. And all he did was knock on a door to do a story. And he was called the N-word, and he just backed away and got in the car. And that was it. But it happens, unfortunately, a lot.
I think part of the problem is that like white society is encouraged to not recognize this stuff. And so we assume, because we're going through it and it seems obvious, that all our white colleagues should know what we're going through. And they often don't. And sometimes, it's very understandable, and sometimes, there's a little more intention to that lack of knowledge. Yeah. But that's what that is. And I'm with you, Rod. I have learned that I have to constantly tell my colleagues when something racist happens to me, so they know that it's happening, because otherwise they're oblivious. And Langston, it was great to hear that the Tampa Bay Times offered counseling to people after George Floyd and in the middle of all that unrest, because I helped cover the riots in St. Petersburg in 1996. And they didn't offer us nothing. They didn't even recognize that we might be traumatized by having to cover riots that resulted from a cop killing a young black man in St. Petersburg. So, it's so weird. It's like, in some ways we're still frustrated, but in some ways there has been some progress.
And that's the important thing to keep in mind, that there has been progress. All right, we're going to take some questions now from some young men that I mentioned before from a mentoring program called Gentleman's Quest. So let's take a listen to those.
All right, my name is Benjamin Murdoch. I go to Junta Middle School, and my question is, what skills do you use when interviewing people?
It's strange how the art of interviewing has kind of evolved since I've kind of been working in TV. I just think the ability to have a conversation is kind of a lost art, I think, now, with people just being on phones and texting and voice texting. One of the things I try to do is, if somebody try to break the ice. I mean, try to just make it not like, okay, I am going to interview you about the game you had just now, or what, if somebody has a sweatshirt on, an Ohio State sweatshirt, and Ohio State just lost or something. Just try to be like a person talking to someone that you're having lunch with. I don't think you have to overthink, asking somebody about themselves. And every situation is different. And I know you don't handle every story, the same way. But I think, as long as the person you're interviewing thinks that they're just chatting with you and making them comfortable, I think is invaluable when you're interviewing somebody.
I would say, go ahead.
I was just that's basically what I would say. I think, just approaching it with just kind of a genuine curiosity about them and making them feel comfortable. I think there's common ground we can find with everyone, whether, they're like you or a complete opposite of you. I think that's always the best place to start, because the more comfortable they feel, the more they're going to be willing to share. I mean, there's nothing like interviewing someone that's terribly nervous and they give you like a sentence and, you want them to be open. So I think the best way to go about that is really establishing, hey, like we're just having a conversation.
Yeah, I would say try to do your homework in advance so you know what you're going to be asking about, and then don't make any assumptions. If they say you have a dog and you can see the dog, ask what breed of dog is that? I found that people just get more comfortable when you're like, yeah, he's going to ask about anything, and people want to be heard.
Yeah, I would say interviews are a conversation with intention. So you should go into the interview knowing, have some sense of what you want to learn from that person. Why are you talking to them? What do you want to get out of them? For big interviews, I sort of chart a flow to it. I want to have moments at the beginning where I establish a rapport with the person, a connection with the person, ask questions that are easy and that are fun and that are funny, if that's possible. If the interview isn't about something super serious. and then guide them into the more difficult questions, and save the questions that you think might upset them or put their guard up. You save those for last. Let them get to know you a little bit, and you should share a little bit of yourself, not constantly talk about yourself, but share a little bit of yourself, because you're asking that person to share themselves with you and then trust you with what they give you. So you have to give a little bit back too. Otherwise, it looks like you're just showing up to take information, and you're not willing to reveal anything of yourself.
I'm stealing that line, conversation with intention, by the way. I'll credit you. I won't plagiarize, but
I'm not the first person to say that. I'm sure I learned it at the Pointer Institute in a class.
And just one thought too, just when you're doing interviews, don't ask closed-end questions. Just don't ask a question that's going to always end with yes or no or a number. And so instead of saying, was it hot today? Yes. What did it feel like outside today? And then that'll get people the opportunity to say a lot more. So.
Hi, my name is Timothy Salmon, 11th grade student at Review High School. And my question for today is, how do you separate your bias while sharing your story?
I tend to avoid using that word bias, because I think people use that word without understanding what they're really saying. In reporting, I think particularly for people of color, it is important for us to bring our perspectives and our values and our knowledge of our culture and our knowledge of how race works in America to stories. That is different than letting your past knowledge create reporting that's unfair. What's important is to be fair. It's not, you can't go into a situation and be completely even-handed. The example I always use is if you're covering a mayoral race or a political race, and this happens a lot for those of us who cover or have covered local politics, you may only have a couple of candidates, and one of them is really good and one of them is really terrible. And it wouldn't make sense to offer coverage that pretends like they're both good, because one of them is terrible, and you can prove it because you've been watching their candidacy. So what's important is to give people an accurate picture of the contest, not to pretend that both sides are equal. And so that's what we're constantly trying to do, is be fair, not necessarily completely even-handed. And if you constantly focus on being fair, I think that helps you figure out where your experience may lead you to be unfair and correct that.
Yeah, I don't think bias. Yeah, like the word bias is kind of heavy. But yeah, I don't think anyone can really, I would say anyone, tell a story and not put a little bit of their own context, depending on what the story is. But yeah, like Eric said, there's a difference between equal and fair when you're talking about the candidates or, in anything. So I think, yeah, the bias, I mean, it's kind of like karaoke or something. Like, I'm going to sing the song. It's going to have my voice in it. The twist is not going to be the original or whatever, but I can't not have my version come out. And, I think, yeah, like you said, be fair. And, I think the opposite point, if you're biased, I think it'll show real quick. Like and then your boss, hopefully will have a nice little conversation about that with you, and you'll hear about it.
My name is Ronnie Plummer. I go to Leonard High School, and I'm a 10th grade student. And my question is, are you uncomfortable when people recognize you in public?
It was a little weird to be out in the grocery store and people start stopping you and talking about news stories. So that was a little bizarre. I think the most bizarre moment is in TV, we have to wear makeup. And I used to, when I first started out, I worked in my hometown. So I would tell my mom, need you to run and go get some makeup for me, because we're the exact same complexion. So she would do it. It'd be great. But when I moved, I had to do it myself. And I went to a store and this old lady was standing next to me and she goes, "Are you going to buy some lipstick too, baby?" And I was like, what do I do with that? And because you can't even cuss her out because she's an old lady. So I was like, "Ma'am, I work in television." She was like, "I'm just playing." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But so those kinds of.
I love how Rod's thought was, "Can I cuss her out?"
That's my first thought. I was like, man, I can't even tell this lady what I'm really thinking right now. But it is interesting, having worked in Tampa for so long, that you're recognizable on TV, and then having moved here, like nobody it has been fantastic because people don't have any idea what I do for a living. It's great. And then with the onset of the pandemic, wearing a mask has been lovely. I can go into Publix and buy groceries and not have to like have 5 conversations on the way out. Not that I mind, but it does happen.
I love that. I think I'm keeping the masks just for that reason.
Same here.
But I think, yeah, a little bit uncomfortable at first, but now I really welcome it because I learn a lot from people that watch. Like I'm, not always the demographic of our audience. So like when people talk about the stories that they remember and, what they like or dislike about me or, whatever, like I feel like that's all cool. And, it's nice to be able to, thank them for watching. And I think that the only times it gets uncomfortable is like when people stare or when they say something from across the way and you're just like, I don't know who you are, but hello,
Yeah, I was
I got the. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. I was a early 20s, nothing, doing sports, starting out, and a guy, black guy, he's probably in his 50s or 60s, and I didn't know him, and I forgot where I was, but he was like, "Oh, thank you very much," and he shook my hand. And I was like, "Thank you," and I told my mom, and I was like, and my dad chimed in, and he was like, "You're the only person of color on TV in this market, right?" And I was like, oh yeah. I'm like, oh, and I was like, maybe that's what that guy, and it never hit me that like, man, he might really be saying thank you for, me being on TV, like just having this job. And now it's, like you said, the masks are good. In the sports, people want to like always tell me, I feel like I'm kind of their like sounding board, like, oh, and let me tell you. And then it's just like the floodgates open. And I'm like, okay. Like you think that the Bucks should cut such and such or whatever. Like, so, but yeah, the Ubers are fun when somebody goes, oh, what do you do for a living? I say, I work at, WFTS, ABC. Oh, what do you do there? And I'm like, thanks for watching. And half the time it's just like, I do sales. Like, I don't want to know all your feelings about the Rays moving. Like, what do you do there?
All right. The worst feeling, you're like, really?
Yeah. So then that ends the conversation real quick. If it's like I do sports, then it's like, oh, what about the NFL? Yeah. So, but I'm not 99.9% of stuff I have is positive. So it's, I like talking to people. And everything, at the store or whatever. But, the mask will be in the back pocket for sure, always.
That's good to know that y'all being recognized. No one's ever recognized me. So, but I am a little like cognizant of like, oh, like I'm in a crowded restaurant. I can't be just like gossiping about, company stuff. So that is something I think I would recommend as advice to keep in mind that, even if somebody doesn't come up to you, they might still know who you are or who you work for. So be careful there. But yeah, I think people look at me and they just don't assume that I would have a job in a newspaper. So, maybe one day.
I got the funniest story about getting recognized. So I went to this press party in LA. It was for all these shows that Fox was making, all these TV shows. So there's all these celebrities and people hanging out. And I walk up and this actor named David Boreanaz, who played Angel and is on this show called SEAL Team now, starts looking at me and he's just like, gesturing for me to come over. And I'm like, I've only interviewed this guy like once for 5 minutes a bunch of years ago. There's no way he recognizes me. So I walk over and he's like, yeah, how you doing, man? He shakes my hand. I was like, oh, this is great, And then I walk over to a bunch of other Black TV critics and I say to them, he thought that I was the guy from American Idol. He thought I was Randy Jackson. I bet he thought I was Randy Jackson. And then he put a post on Twitter later that night saying, I mistook a journalist for Randy Jackson. I swear to God. And I was just like, see,
I don't know how.
And that was not the first time I had been mistaken for Randy Jackson. That was the second time. Wow. So, yes.
Okay, Randy Deggans.
Yeah, I tell you what, I used to put up on social media like a picture of him and a picture of me. This is Randy Jackson. This is me, because I started to get a complex about it.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
But if it gets you that free upgrade, like to first class or something,
I wish. See, I never got
there were people to be mistaken for. Yeah,
I just got the attention of these like jerks.
Hey, dog, what's up with that first class?
Yeah, I'm Randy Jackson. Let me into this concert. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea, Kevin. I'm gonna try that.
Hi, my name is Robert Stone. I'm a freshman at Patel High School, and my question for you is, what story were you most passionate about?
I think weather coverage for me has just been, something that I've really truly enjoyed. Being a meteorologist and also a reporter, I kind of have a unique perspective and able to tell those stories, and had a unique opportunity in Charlotte to fly with the hurricane hunters into Hurricane Dorian when it was a close to Category 5 storm, which was a unique opportunity and experience. And then a week later, actually go to the Bahamas, which was the hardest hit areas, and tell some of those stories. A lot of people, a lot of those areas just get forgotten in the coverage. And it was cool to do that for a local station because like someone reached out to us and was like, hey, like I've got family in the Bahamas. I haven't been able to reach them. And the best part was when we got down there, we got in touch with her and was obviously out of power and all this stuff because of the storm. But there was a lot of memorable moments there.
I think for me in 2018, I started doing some data work looking at the potential Amendment 4, which did give the right to vote to former felons, people who've been locked up for years. And some of that work early on involved talking to, grown men, fathers and grandfathers with criminal histories, like, ostensibly tough dudes crying, very emotional about this one thing that they felt, and in their words, helped make them whole and helped, and it was something that they wanted their families to know about them. They felt very, very grateful and very passionate about this new freedom that they had gotten. So I think some of that work, which turned into some bigger stories with another reporter, Lawrence Maurer, I think that's what I felt most deeply as I was doing it. And I'm proud of that work that we did, and it was very rewarding to be able to do that.
Yeah, and locally, I talked to, it's from the small world category. I got an email from a woman in Miami about a guy who played football at University of Illinois, where my dad taught for 10 years, and I lived in Champaign, but he's from Tampa, and Bobby Roundtree is his name, and he was, I don't want to misuse the medical term, incomplete quadriplegic, I want to say. He got hurt in a swimming, it was a boat at a boat swimming party, whatever, broke his neck basically, and has partial use of his hands kind of from the chest down. He's paralyzed. And I was like, wow, and now his thing, he posts videos, he's working out, he says, I'm going to be walking again. And I just like talking to people, like just to something that I could never imagine happening, like to me or my sister or whatever. And then just him talking like, because I go in there being like, God, what if, I get emotional, or what if he, but his, one of those people that I never just like, there was never a negative moment in the interview. He was like, yeah, this, I'm like, what are the challenges? He's telling me, he can't, his mom feeds him basically a lot. He can't do, day-to-day things, but, he's just has such a positive outlook and such like, oh, I still do this, I want to get back up and blah, blah. And from a guy who was a Division I athlete, maybe on an NFL track, to having to start over and just, did some push-ups today. And on Twitter, he does, earn your weekend. He's doing, medicine ball stuff and getting up and working. I just, lucky enough, I consider myself to cover, people who have to overcome things that you say, oh, it's a news story, oh, it's a sports story, but like, wow, getting to sit down with these people and actually, like Langston was saying, see someone that you never thought would cry, or see someone that you never, thought would respond this way to. There's just me holding the camera and a microphone. That's all. That's what I'm doing. Like the story's about you. That you can never lose. I think with stories like those.
And I would mention three stories. Like I love covering the intersection of race and media. So I found out that there were a bunch of Black people who had been on Survivor, the TV show, and who felt that the way the show was structured was racist and made it harder for Black people to compete. And so I did a story for NPR where I got all their experiences together. And then a few months later, CBS declared that they were going to make sure that half of the people who compete on all of their reality shows, Big Brother, Amazing Race, and Survivor would be non-white people. But one of my favorite stories to cover in the Tampa Bay area was this guy who showed up, who was going to get the key to the city, who was a gospel artist, who said that he had written the theme songs to A Greatest American Hero and Cheers, TV shows. And I got a call out of the blue from his agent setting up this interview. And so the guy said that the gospel artist had discovered he had a long lost brother in St. Petersburg, and he wanted me to be there to document him meeting this guy. So I go and I do the interview with him and his brother. It's in a really weird setting. The interview felt really off. And as I'm driving away from it, I'm thinking to myself, like, if a gospel artist had written the theme song to Cheers, I would know that. I know that kind of crazy trivia stuff about pop culture. So I went and looked it up, and of course he didn't. And then I looked it up. He didn't write the theme song to Greatest American Hero. And then he said he had been Grammy nominated. So I called the Grammy people, and they were like, no, he hasn't been Grammy nominated. And then he said he had been nominated for a Dove Award, which is the gospel equivalent of the Grammy. And I called them up, and they said, we have been telling this guy to stop telling people that he's been nominated, because you can nominate yourself. You could put stuff in, and then you can say you're nominated. So I wrote this story for the St. Petersburg Times, because he was playing at all these churches, and he was going to take donations. Right. And I had called churches that he had performed at before, and they said that it seemed like he couldn't even sing. like he wasn't even a singer. So I wrote this story for the front page of the St. B Times. And of course, they yanked they wouldn't give him the key to the city, and the churches canceled the concerts. And I felt like, I kind of done my job as a journalist, exposing this guy who was trying to rip off the community. So that's my most fun story in the St. B Times.
Wow.
Hello, my name is Jalen Morris. I go to East Bay High School, and I'm in the 12th grade. What Black journalist inspired you to get into this field?
For me, it was my father. My father was a columnist. I grew up in Gary, Indiana. My father was a columnist for the Post-Tribune newspaper, and also for the Crusader newspapers. There's versions of them in Gary and in Chicago. And him doing that, I mean, his main job was something else. He was a columnist on the side, and a concert promoter on the side, and a jazz DJ on the side. But watching somebody get paid to write for a newspaper let me know that was a job I could have. I could earn a living writing for a newspaper, and that somebody like me, my dad, had already done it. And so he helped me get my early writing jobs in high school, writing for the same newspaper that he wrote for, and started me on my path. So my dad would be that example. Chuck Deggans.
I watched a lot of TV growing up, Saturday mornings, and Ahmad Rashad on TV. I was like, I took for granted that they were like, you can be on network TV, like, as a Black man. And, growing up, just seeing, NBA inside stuff, and even just, watching basketball, or being like, oh, let's go to, just seeing a report, like somebody holding a microphone on a sideline, like, wow, like that's possible. Like Stuart Scott wasn't like the late Stuart Scott, never, his style was different, but, I would just be like, wow, it's possible. Like, there, you can be Black and sit in those chairs. And, I just thought
Cool side of the pillow.
Yeah, the other, yes, who's the other side of the pillow. And now, it's Lester Holt on a network, the evolution, my dad would always say, I never give you the when I was your age thing, but he's like, when I was your age, like that, that was not a thing. And I tell people, it's like, imagine being in your early 20s and having like not having civil rights, you know what I mean? Like in the eyes of the law. And, you 22-year-old, that law being passed. So, he's like, we've come a long way, and just don't. My dad wasn't a journalist, but I'll put him in that recipe too.
I'm going to jump in because there was somebody way back, probably before y'all were born, except Eric. Max Robinson.
Oh, thanks.
Ageist.
Max Robinson. was an amazing journalist, Black male journalist who is someone that I watch. Carol Simpson is someone that I watched many, many years, and push forward to last year, I had a chance to do a panel discussion with Miss Carol Simpson, and I thought I was going to lose my mind. It was the most amazing experience that I've ever had. She is a hoot.
The original auntie of television.
Yeah, let me tell you something. That was fun. But those were some of the national names, but there were some, for me in Tallahassee, some local folks that not necessarily inspired me to be in journalism, but when I made the decision to go into journalism, that they were very, very helpful. So I always point them out. One is a man by the name of Ellison Womack, who recently passed away. He was a producer of public TV. Literally, I owe that man my career. He gave me my start. A woman named Carmen Cummings, first Black female anchor in Tallahassee, worked with me constantly, and then a photographer named Joe Bonner. So I always recognize them in any setting when people ask that question, because I just think it's important that we always remember, and then we try to do the same thing for somebody else.
I'll give you a compliment, Rod, whether you want it or not. When you came to the Tampa Bay area, man, you were so polished and on top of it. And I thought, this is somebody who's really going to make a mark and prove that diversity will improve the local TV market.
Appreciate that. You saw that in all the car accidents I covered? Yeah.
Every one of them.
For me, growing up in DC, like I came into journalism both because like Eric, my dad was a reporter, and seeing what he did and hearing from him, hearing his opinions about the game and how it should be. And then just as a kid, loving sports, in DC, reading people like Mike Wilbine, Kevin Blackistone, and David Aldridge, and then them having, Black people continuing to cover the Wizards, like Candace Buckner and all that, didn't really realize how special it was to have that many, Black voices in sports in the local paper growing up. And that was really cool to see. And then, in school, the person who spoke at our commencement was Nicole Hannah-Jones, and being able to see her stuff at North Carolina, a few years ago was really cool to follow. And then students who are a little bit older than me going to the same school, seeing their work in data. Brittany Mays, is a friend of mine. So being able to see that line, throughout the time I was growing up, I don't know, it just keeps reminding you it's possible, and it's just great to see, to have as many idols as you can.
I'll just say this real quick. A thank you to Eric and Rod just for everything that you've done. Obviously older than the rest of us in terms of really establishing that diversity and that culture in this market. Making it possible for this market to start to look a little bit more like the community. So a thank you to both of you, because it's hard for us to, at least for me, to truly understand and appreciate that, not knowing, the history. And for me, like my path, I think was a little bit different. I never really saw myself in this business. And I think part of it was because there just weren't a lot of people that did, that were Black meteorologists. So it wasn't so much like there was one or two people that actually like inspired me to go into news, but more so like once I got into it and started to meet people and started to get to know people through NABJ, that I felt like, okay, like this is possible. And I have the support of older guys like Paul Goodlow and Andrew Humphreys and Alan Seals and Betty Davis and things like that.
And thank you, gentlemen. I think that was our last question from those young men. Thank you to the gentleman from Gentleman's Quest, the young man who put those questions together and did that for us. Unfortunately, we couldn't use everybody's question. We did get a lot. I put the call out and said, hey, can you get some of the guys to do questions? And we got a lot. So unfortunately, we couldn't use them all, but I'm glad we were able to do the few that we were able to do. And again, Kevin, Langston, Tony, and Eric, thank you all for everything that you bring to this profession. A lot of people talk a lot of junk about journalism, but we are a noble profession still. I believe it wholeheartedly. And what each of you do and has contributed to the profession has been fantastic. And again, for everyone who's watching, thanks for participating in the Black Male Media Project. And I know there are a lot of different events that are going on today. So please, if you can, take part in all of those. Again, thanks so much. And on behalf of NABJ, of which I am the outgoing Region 3 director, if I'm smiling too hard, I apologize, but I'm outgoing, and that's a good thing. Let me tell you, it's been a fantastic couple of
It's
years.
bad for us though, man.
No, it's great.
Bad. We're gonna lose you, man.
It's great. The person who is next in line, who will be elected because she's running unopposed, is fantastic. So it's gonna be great, I promise. But it's been a great 2 years doing it. So again, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you all being here with us today. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and go Bolts.